Good morning and welcome to this morning's children's talk from Providence Baptist Church. This morning we will have our last story from the book of 1 Samuel about King Saul before we start thinking about Easter. And today I want you to think about the importance of commands. Many of you will recognize this sign. If you're a school child, you will know that the crossing patrol carry this sign and will hold it up to tell drivers to stop so that you can cross the road safely. And if you are a driver, you know that to ignore this command and keep driving would be very dangerous. So there are commands that it is very dangerous to disobey. Disobedience has serious consequences. Adam and Eve disobeyed God's command not to eat the fruit of the tree at the center of the Garden of Eden. Because they disobeyed, sin entered the world and death through sin. The consequences of their disobedience were very serious, and it affected others, not just them. Now we have seen the Israelites rejecting God and his representative Samuel, and instead wanting a king so that they could be just like other nations, not understanding that being God's people meant they were to be different from other people. And last time we saw how God caused them to choose Saul to be king over them, just the sort of man other nations had as king. Now Saul faced many challenges to his rule as king, and one of the biggest challenges was the Philistines. They were the strongest army in the land, and when Saul challenged them, they came to fight him in such large numbers and with such weapons that his army was terrified and hid themselves. Saul had agreed with Samuel that he should wait until Samuel should come, so that Samuel could make sacrifices to God and that God might bless Saul's leadership. But when Saul saw how afraid his army was and Samuel didn't arrive when he expected him to, Saul made the sacrifices himself. But that was not the king's job. That was for the priests and Samuel to do. In other nations, the king might be a priest for pagan gods, but for God's people, only the promised Messiah would be king and priest. Just as Saul was finishing, Samuel arrived. "You acted foolishly," he said. "You have not kept God's command. Now your kingdom will not last, and the leadership will be given to someone else." Saul's disobedience had serious consequences. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. So said Samuel. Next week, we will be thinking about Easter. Thank you for listening.